right now, businesses and churches and everybody, maybe even you, are asking the same question. How am I going to recover from this? After being off of work for however many months and getting back into the real world, how financially do I recover from this? What about the clients I've lost? And there is a legitimate concern with those kind of things. And business, for sure, there's a concern about it since we've lost so much money. But right now, I want to focus on the church part of this concern. Because right now, a lot of churches are looking around and they haven't been in the building literally for months. And the leadership in some places are concerned about what if we come back and we've lost 50% of what we've had? What if we come back in and the contribution is lower than it was? All these kind of concerns that everyone else is having. Well, I want to talk about Jesus for a minute and how he handled that same situation, because we sometimes forget that Jesus himself had a following, and he may have been tempted to worry about the numbers like sometimes you and me do. So in John 6, Jesus is wandering pretty much in the wilderness, kind of going from town to town. But in one such occasion, a crowd follows him from the cities out into the middle of the woods, the wilderness. And it's kind of getting late in the day, and there's not a McDonald's or a Subway that they can just stop on the side of the road and feed everybody with. 5,000 people are out in the middle of the day, and there's no food for anybody. So the classic story is Jesus takes a few loaves of bread and a few fish, and he multiplies all of them until he feeds a crowd of 5,000 people. That's kind of a number that's hard for us to imagine unless we go to maybe a concert or some kind of sporting event. But imagine having to feed 5,000 people. What's your budget? What's the menu look like? Logistically, how do you pass out everything to people? Let's scale it down even further. Imagine having to feed 500 people. What do you do and where do you go? But that's the whole point of the miracle, is that Jesus divides all of this and feeds 5,000 people. And the Bible records in John 6 that there were even leftover food after they got done eating. So, as you might expect, some people realize, hey, following Jesus means that we get some free food on the side. So Jesus' numbers, his followers, naturally increase. And as the great Michael Scott once said in his book, Somehow I Manage, everyone likes the guy who offers him a free stick of gum. So everyone from town to town, the word is spreading that Jesus, if you go follow him, he'll give you a free lunch, man. Go and follow this Jesus guy. What other rabbis doing that? So Jesus realizes this. He realizes his numbers are off the chart, and he's got a ton of folks following him. And he makes a decision that I think every business leader and maybe sometimes every church leader would look at and just marvel or do a face palm. I'm not sure what they would do. But he decides, I have too many people following me. I need to lighten the load a little bit. So in John 6, he gives a really difficult lesson. And he has a really tough exchange with these people where he says, hey, you like the free bread? Well, eventually, if you want to follow me, you'll have to eat my bread and you have to drink my blood if you want to follow me. That's the fulfillment of what God did for your forefathers in the wilderness wandering when he gave them manna. And so people are looking at this guy who's giving free lunch, and he gives this hard lesson, and they say, if that's what it's going to take to follow you, then I'm out. You know, it was fun at first when the food was coming, but now it's just kind of weird. So many disciples, people who considered themselves followers of Jesus, they turned around and left. And Jesus even looked back to his 12 original disciples who he picked and said, you guys going to go too? Is that too much for you? And Peter speaks up and says, where else will we go? We believe that you're the Christ. We think that you have the words of eternal life. We're not going anywhere. But even then, Jesus turns around and says, I've chosen you, but one of you is a devil, and you'll betray me. That story sounds kind of bleak, and it sounds like the moral of the lesson is sometimes people leave for no reason, and there's nothing you can do about it. But I want to draw your attention to John chapter 15. Because in John chapter 15, this is years after the incident and the miracle that he did feeding the 5,000 people. But Jesus is talking about how he personally sees and processes loss and gain. John 15 and verse 1. I am the true vine, and my Father is the vine dresser. Just a side note here. A vine dresser is not someone who goes and puts dresses on vines. It's someone it's a farmer pretty much, who prunes dead vines and clears out the weeds and things like that. So Jesus is the vine and God is the vine dresser, the one who is a gardener. In verse 2, every branch in me that doesn't bear fruit, he takes away. And every branch that does bear fruit, he prunes that it may bear more fruit. This is really interesting because in Jesus' mind, he doesn't view loss and gain as under his control. He says, I'm the vine, but God is the vine dresser. So I can be fruitful here and I can do everything I want, but at the end of the day, God decides who's thrown out and God decides who grows. So in Jesus' mind in John 6, when he has to make that hard decision of letting all those multitudes walk away, in his mind, it's not a bad thing. In Jesus' mind, it's a refining moment. Jesus would rather have quality disciples over quantity. Before we move on, I want you to think about that and how that applies to our modern world. How many leaders and how many businesses do you know would reject someone's business because they said, well, you might not be the right person we're looking at, or maybe you're not the kind of right morally person that we would like to have here. In the business world, money is money. As long as it's gotten fairly and as long as you worked for it, that's fair game. Money is just money. It doesn't matter who it comes from. And sometimes that seeps into churches as well. How many churches have you heard of that are having things that have nothing to do with Jesus at all? They're having these fundraisers or these activities, and the whole point is essentially to trick people into following Jesus, where hopefully the idea is one day you'll have been following Jesus so long that you look up and say, oh, I'm a Christian now. Well, thank you, church, for tricking me into following Jesus. That was not Jesus' approach. When Jesus realized that what he was doing was creating quantity follower, people who just wanted the free lunch, he took steps to find out who was really on board and who was just there for a free lunch. And there are a couple applications we can draw from Jesus' teaching. Number one, loss is not always a bad thing. It always hurts up front, but it's not always a bad thing. If you've lost business, if churches have lost members, even if you've lost friends during this time, you stop communicating, that's not always a bad thing because it shows you who's really there for you and who's really not there for you at all. Number two, what this whole pruning, vine dressing thing has to do with us, we get to be refined by that process. In 1 Peter 1, 6 and 7, Peter says that we should rejoice when we come upon various trials. When things aren't going our way, we should, instead of feeling bad for ourselves and down on ourselves and wondering about the future, we should feel good about our situation right now. And he compares our faith like a precious metal, like gold or silver, where if you want to refine a precious metal, get all the bad stuff out of it, you super heat up an oven or a chamber, you superheat it up, and by that superheating or trials in this situation, the bad stuff rises to the top and you get to skim that off, and what you're left with is pure gold. That's what he says that trials are like for us. So in this trial here, we're actually better off after than we were before because we have refining. We're refining our situation here. Lastly, what I want to encourage you, if you're someone who is ready to get back into services and you're ready to go out and minister to people, and you're someone who's more motivated now to do God's work than you were before, get ready. You better be ready to grow like you've never grown before, because if what Jesus says is true in John 15, if God's really going to come around and help us produce more fruit, if we're ready to be there and willing to work, then there's going to be a ton of work to do when we come back. And God's going to hold us to that standard. Hosanna!